"I have never encountered anyone in the royal family who behaved as improperly as Meghan Markle," Duchess Sophie said on 9 November 2025. The interview had been planned as a quiet, controlled moment, a reflective conversation marking the close of another year in a monarchy slowly navigating transition. But when Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, appeared on BBC's Evening Reflections, the tone shifted instantly and completely. What was meant to be calm turned electric. The conversation transformed into one of the most explosive royal disclosures in over a decade. Her words sent shockwaves across Britain, the Commonwealth, and every major digital platform from London to Los Angeles. Sitting beneath muted studio lights in a modest Westminster set, Sophie finally broke years of deliberate restraint. And the silence snapped. When asked about the ongoing public debate surrounding Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, Sophie didn't hesitate for even a second. Her voice stayed calm, controlled and steady, but the meaning behind it cut sharply. Meghan's behaviour toward members of the family, especially William, Sophie said, was not merely unfamiliar, it was inappropriate, and it directly undermined the dignity of the crown. With that single sentence, Sophie cracked open a story the palace had quietly contained since 2018. The public had long seen fragments, staff whispers, awkward moments, sudden absences, but never before had a senior royal spoken so plainly, so deliberately, and with such authority. Within minutes of the broadcast, clips of Sophie's remarks flooded social media. Hashtags surged across X, formerly Twitter. Sophie Speaks, Royal Standards, and Meghan Conduct dominated trending lists. Major networks interrupted scheduled programming just to replay the moment again and again as reactions poured in. For the first time since the Oprah interview in March 2021, the royal narrative shifted decisively. And this time, the institution itself was speaking. The following morning, 10th November 2025, a senior palace representative released a brief but pointed clarification. The statement said the Duchess of Edinburgh's views reflected long-standing expectations of conduct within the royal family and the standards required to protect the integrity of the institution. It was the closest the palace had ever come to publicly endorsing criticism of Meghan. Sources close to Buckingham Palace told The Times and The Telegraph that Sophie's decision to speak wasn't sudden. It came from years of accumulated frustration. According to aides who served during Meghan's early arrival, Sophie was one of the few royals who genuinely tried to welcome her in 2018. She invited Meghan to private lunches, offered guidance on royal protocol, and even assisted in the lead-up to Meghan and Harry's wedding at St. George's Chapel. Those efforts, Sophie reportedly told producers before the BBC interview, were met with dismissal and impatience. She had just joined, one longtime courtier summarised, explaining the tension. Sophie does not gossip, and insiders say when she speaks publicly, it signals that the private reality had already gone too far. Sophie's most startling claim, the one now echoing across newsrooms worldwide, focused on Meghan's conduct toward Prince William. Dating back to late 2018 and early 2019, multiple aides noticed what they described as overfamiliar gestures directed at the future king. These included hugging, cheek kisses during greetings, repeated arm-touching during conversations, and leaning in physically during engagements. Staff said these behaviours were deeply out of alignment with royal standards. Sophie stated clearly during the interview that this was not simply cultural difference. It was persistence, she said. It made many of us uncomfortable, including William. Royal protocol limits physical gestures to formal greetings, and even then, discretion is expected, especially in public or semi-public settings. To underline her point, Sophie referenced a notorious moment from May 2019. A misinterpreted camera angle during a charity event made it appear as though King Charles had kissed Catherine too closely on the cheek. The palace spent 3 full days issuing clarifications and correcting tabloids. If a harmless misunderstanding involving the king and Catherine caused national uproar, Sophie said, imagine the consequences of repeated behaviour crossing much clearer boundaries. The comparison landed hard. Sophie went further, saying Meghan's overly familiar behaviour was not limited to William alone. She described similar uninvited closeness toward Catherine, Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, Sarah Ferguson, and even Prince Andrew during a garden event in 2019. I told Edward early on, Sophie admitted, something is not right here. She explained Meghan appeared less interested in blending into the family and more focused on positioning herself within it. By early 2020, months before Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, senior staff had already documented several concerning patterns. These included sharing private conversations with outside advisors, informal communication with American media figures, frustration with hierarchy, and insistence on equal billing with William and Catherine. Staff burnout reportedly escalated fast under her management style. These concerns later aligned with notes referenced in the palace's internal HR review, launched in March 2021, though the findings were never fully disclosed to the public. One palace insider described Sophie as the family's pressure valve, saying she speaks only when silence becomes impossible. With Harry and Meghan attempting a partial return through negotiations for UK security support in October 2025, an effort quickly rejected by both the Home Office and the Palace, the institution reached what one advisor called a moment of necessary clarity. Sophie made clear her statement was not personal. "It is a line in the sand," she said. "We cannot rewrite history to suit external narratives," she added plainly. "What happened happened, and the kingdom deserves honesty." It wasn't just one incident. According to Duchess Sophie, Meghan's inappropriate closeness toward William followed a repeated pattern that made multiple senior royals uncomfortable, and Sophie was not alone in feeling that way or finally speaking out. In a separate ITV interview broadcast on the 29th of November 2025, Sophie again addressed reports of boundary-crossing behaviour. When asked directly, she nodded gently, her voice calm but firm, saying, "There are ways we interact, codes we observe. They're not written down, but they are known." She added, "She did not respect them." Staff later pointed to early holiday gatherings at Sandringham in 2018. While most newcomers take time to observe and learn unspoken rules, Meghan reportedly leaned into American informality, hugs, casual touches, and performative warmth. As one former aide described in a 2021 report published by The Times, at a formal garden party hosted by Prince Charles in May 2018, just 3 days after the Sussex wedding, multiple attendees reported seeing Meghan greet William not with a curtsy or handshake, but with a cheek kiss and a casual touch on the arm, a gesture that reportedly made William visibly stiffen. According to biographer Tom Quinn's 2025 book, Brothers in Conflict, this moment was quietly flagged by insiders as the first real sign of discomfort. Staff described it as the spark that triggered whispers among senior aides. Something felt off, and it didn't fade away. When those early concerns were raised, they were noted, logged, and watched closely. But the pattern kept building. It didn't stop there. In October 2018, during a Buckingham Palace event for World Mental Health Day, Meghan was again seen placing her hand on William's back while speaking to him. In many social circles, that might seem harmless, but within royal protocol, touching the heir to the throne in that way is considered inappropriate. One courtier noted William shifted his stance quickly, offered a polite nod, but gave no reciprocal gesture at all. What troubled Sophie more was that this behaviour wasn't limited to William alone. "It wasn't just about William," Sophie explained later during her interview. "There was a pattern." She described Meghan showing a similar familiarity toward Sarah Ferguson, toward Catherine, and even toward herself. Sophie said the physical gestures, from cheek kisses to repeated touching during conversations, felt theatrical rather than natural. While that kind of physicality may be common in Hollywood circles, inside palace walls it raised alarms. Not because of snobbery or xenophobia, as some defenders later argued, but because it signalled a refusal to adapt. There are differences, yes. Cultural ones, Sophie admitted. But if you join a family, any family, you try to learn their way, don't you? She didn't. She wanted us to change for her. That sentiment echoed through reports from 2019 and 2020, as tensions quietly rose within the so-called Fab Four: William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan. One Kensington Palace aide quoted in Valentine Lowe's 2023 book Courtiers described how Meghan often ignored internal briefings during state visits, choosing instead to greet officials her own way, sometimes bypassing protocol entirely. Sophie also revealed how Meghan's behaviour behind closed doors began affecting Catherine directly. "It was a delicate time for everyone," Sophie said. William and Catherine were taking on more responsibility. Catherine, she explained, values calm, structure, and careful preparation. Meghan arrived like a storm. One notable incident occurred in January 2019 during preparations for a joint appearance at the Royal Foundation Forum. Meghan reportedly refused to follow the seating order that had already been agreed upon, insisting instead on a speaking position beside William. Rather than observing the traditional couple pairing format, she pushed back hard. The aftermath, Sophie recalled, was tense and emotionally draining. Catherine was reportedly left in tears after a difficult conversation between the two women following the event. But perhaps the most emotionally charged moment came later that year. During Archie's christening in July 2019, Meghan reportedly rejected several proposed photographers and refused to publicly share the names of Archie's godparents. The move broke with long-standing royal tradition and created a serious public relations headache for the palace. It wasn't just privacy, Sophie said quietly. It was control. That desire for control, Sophie believes, extended into Meghan's relationship with Harry as well. She knew what Harry had endured, Sophie said. Losing his mother, the pressure, the loneliness. Meghan brought him joy. Yes, but Sophie also suggested she close doors behind them. Insiders now describe what they call a calculated withdrawal, a slow isolation of Harry, not just from the institution, but from his most trusted anchors, his brother and his grandmother. What was once dismissed as tabloid exaggeration has gained new weight in light of Sophie's carefully chosen words. "I don't believe she came with innocent intentions," Sophie said. "Not after everything that followed. From Oprah to Spare, from Netflix to heavy branding around the Archewell Foundation, Meghan's time in the royal family is increasingly being reframed, not as a simple story of resistance, but as a collision of culture, ego, and unmet expectations. According to Sophie, the cracks didn't start in press offices or online feeds. They started in quiet rooms at Windsor, rooms where William stood stiff during unwanted cheek kisses, and where Catherine wiped her eyes after one too many boundary breaches. The unease Sophie described in her November 2025 interview didn't stay hidden for long. Over time, tensions turned into open fractures, some managed discreetly, others exploding across global headlines. Sophie said the family tried to accommodate, integrate, and support Meghan's transition into royal life. Instead of meeting tradition with humility, Sophie said Meghan brought a Hollywood-style ambition that clashed sharply with the monarchy's rhythm. One of the earliest signs of irreparable strain came during the Commonwealth Day service on 9th March 2020, Meghan and Harry's final appearance as working royals. While the public focused on body language between the Fab Four, insiders noticed something deeper. According to two aides present, Meghan insisted on a different seating protocol, arguing that being a duchess meant equality, not hierarchy. The disagreement caused a last-minute reshuffle and delayed William and Catherine's entrance. What some interpreted as a snub was actually an effort to avoid further public tension. "I remember that day clearly," Sophie shared. "It wasn't just cold looks, it was the awareness that this chapter had closed, not with peace but with performance. There was sadness," Sophie said, "but mostly relief." From there, Harry and Meghan's path split sharply from the rest of the family. The decision to sit down with Oprah Winfrey for a primetime interview aired on 7th March 2021 was, in Sophie's words, a final break with discretion. As the palace scrambled to manage allegations of racism and emotional neglect, Sophie stayed publicly silent. But in 2025, she revealed many within the family felt betrayed and ambushed. "I offered to speak to her more than once," Sophie admitted. Meghan declined every time, according to later confirmed royal correspondence. Sophie had reached out in 2019 and again in 2020, offering informal guidance on press pressure and royal expectations. Meghan reportedly replied, "I have Harry. That's all I need." Sophie now reflects on that exchange with frustration and quiet sadness. "I saw someone who wanted the crown without the weight," Sophie said. "And when she realised what came with it, she turned her back, but not quietly." Meghan's narrative gained global attention, but it also triggered serious questions in the UK about loyalty to the institution. Polling by YouGov following the Oprah interview showed public trust in the monarchy falling from 70% to 58%, with support for Harry and Meghan dropping even more sharply among older audiences. "It wasn't just the family that took a hit," Sophie said. "It was the nation's identity." Those wounds deepened further with the release of the 6-part Netflix docuseries in December 2022, marketed as a love story, but quickly shifting into a one-sided critique of royal life, spotlighting alleged coldness, rigid protocol, and media manipulation. While Harry spoke publicly about feeling trapped, Meghan framed herself as silenced, even drawing comparisons to Princess Diana. But Sophie, like many inside the family, took serious issue with how that story was presented. Diana was adored, Sophie said carefully. She didn't need to tear others down to be heard. Meghan, by contrast, Sophie implied, built her platform through division, and that cuts against the way this family operates. What shocked Sophie even more than the comparisons were the private materials released in the Netflix documentary. Unseen footage, private photographs, and WhatsApp messages taken inside royal residences were suddenly made public. Moments never intended for broadcast were now content, and for Sophie, that crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. For us, privacy isn't about secrecy, Sophie explained. It's about dignity. The palace response was deliberately restrained. Statements from Buckingham and Kensington were brief, expressing sadness over the couple's feelings while refusing to dispute details point by point, even as pressure mounted. Sophie revealed that the decision to stay silent was made jointly by King Charles and Prince William. It was a calculated act of restraint meant to protect the monarchy's long-term stability, not a lack of response. But the silence didn't end the storm. In January 2023, Harry's memoir Spare landed like a shockwave. Its 416 pages contained deeply personal confessions, critiques of royal routines, and intimate family moments, claims about William's temper, Charles's parenting, and even Catherine's demeanour. Sophie, mentioned only briefly, chose not to respond at the time. It wasn't a book, Sophie later said. It was a grenade. One passage in particular ignited chaos. Harry's account of a physical confrontation with William over Meghan. Though Harry described it as a scuffle, headlines screamed about royal violence. American talk shows ran wild with speculation about dysfunction at the heart of the monarchy. Through it all, the institution held its composure publicly. But behind palace walls, Sophie said, the pain was real. People forget we are a family, she said. We laugh, we grieve, we disagree. But we don't broadcast our wounds to the world. Meghan and Harry did. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. Donations to royal-linked charities dipped temporarily, anti-monarchy protests surged in Australia and Canada, and internal trust fractured badly. In Sophie's view, Meghan didn't just fail to adapt, she weaponized her alienation. The exit wasn't about peace, Sophie said bluntly. It was about leverage. She added that the family, flawed as it is, deserved better than being reduced to props in someone else's commercial arc. By early 2024, the cumulative damage reached a tipping point. After years of silence, the monarchy began responding, not through interviews, but through decisions. At the centre were two unresolved issues: the status of Archie and Lilibet, and Harry's demand for armed security in the UK. In her widely discussed interview, aired in late November 2025, Sophie addressed both with rare candour. For the first time, a senior royal acknowledged what had long remained internal. There was deep unease about the long-term intentions behind the Sussexes' requests. It's not about the children, Sophie said carefully. It's about what the titles represent. She stressed lineage, trust, and transparency. You cannot abandon the crown and then expect it to bend around you. The question of Archie and Lilibet's titles had lingered since Queen Elizabeth II's passing in September 2022. With Charles ascending the throne, Harry's children technically became eligible to use prince and princess styles. But unlike George, Charlotte, and Louis, no immediate proclamation followed. It wasn't until March 2023 that Meghan's team publicly referred to Lilibet as princess in a press release. The palace did not object, but it also did not formally confirm. According to Sophie and multiple sources, the issue remained unresolved behind the scenes. There was hesitation, Sophie explained. Not about background, but about behaviour. She added, "You cannot weaponize the system and still expect its privileges." In a particularly sensitive moment, Sophie indirectly addressed long-circulating rumours without validating them. "The Crown never demanded any test," she said firmly. But when people ask why titles weren't automatic, the answer is discretion. She clarified the concern was not biology, but intention. The remark sent shockwaves across both supporters and critics. "We don't ask for blood," Sophie said. "We ask for loyalty." And she added that loyalty had been missing. The trust gap widened further with Harry's continued legal push for armed police protection in the UK in early 2024. Harry's legal team reignited a battle with the Home Office, arguing he should be allowed to privately fund armed officers while in Britain. The palace, though not part of the lawsuit, made its displeasure known quietly through official channels. "To demand state protection while rejecting the duties that justify it," Sophie said, "is not just tone-deaf, it's dangerous." She drew a pointed comparison to Prince Andrew's legal battles in 2021, saying, "It was embarrassing then, and it's no less embarrassing now." Internally, King Charles's position hardened in July 2024. In a private letter seen by senior advisers, he reaffirmed that no royal without public duties would receive state security privileges. The Sussexes were informed discreetly through official liaisons. The consequences were swift. Archewell Foundation donations reportedly dropped nearly 40% in the third quarter of 2024, according to filings cited by People and Forbes. Public opinion followed suit. A YouGov poll in October 2024 showed 68% of Britons believed the Sussexes should receive no financial or security support from the monarchy or government. Sophie's remarks now mirror that public mood perfectly. "They want the protection," Sophie said, "but not the burden." She added firmly, "That's not how duty works." In the next section, the focus turns to how these unresolved tensions finally boiled over in late 2025, triggering one final scandal that forced even the palace's most silent figures to act. By autumn, the conclusion was clear. There would be no reconciliation, not publicly, not institutionally, and not while Meghan continued what Sophie described as public monologues framed as grievances. According to multiple palace sources, the turning point came in October 2025, shortly after King Charles returned from a private medical retreat at Balmoral. Though no official health update was released, the king was described as reflective and strategic, reviewing polling data and internal reports with his private secretary. What he saw was troubling. Support for the monarchy remained stable at around 60%, but approval for Harry had dropped to 28% and for Meghan to just 19%. At the same time, coverage of the Sussexes' latest Netflix project, a docuseries on female resilience, was quietly overshadowed by reports of a new request from Harry to meet his father and brother at Sandringham over Christmas, and the palace response remained exactly as before, absolute silence. There was zero appetite for another summit, and Sophie made that crystal clear. After everything that had already been said, published, sold, and streamed, the palace was done playing along. She explained that they were not about to host a press moment dressed up as a family reconciliation, dated firmly to September 19th. Sophie also revealed she personally declined an informal request from Harry's office to publicly support Meghan after the backlash from that podcast appearance earlier in September, where Meghan again suggested certain royal figures had benefited from her pain. For years, Sophie avoided speaking out about the Sussexes, but this time felt different. She said there comes a moment when it stops being personal and starts feeling corrosive. By November 2025, insiders described the Crown's stance as firm, even if it stayed unspoken. No more elevation for Harry and Meghan, no new titles for the children, and no return of publicly funded protection. The message was quiet, but locked in. Instead, the palace shifted its focus forward. Queen Camilla reduced her workload due to health concerns, while Prince William stepped into greater visibility. Catherine's Together at Christmas concert, scheduled for December 3rd, was widely praised and carefully planned, and it was against this backdrop that Meghan made what many insiders called her most provocative move yet, releasing a competing Netflix holiday special. The timing raised eyebrows immediately. That special landed right alongside Catherine's national broadcast. Leaked planning documents shared with entertainment reporters in Los Angeles showed Meghan's program was originally slated for November 29th, then quietly moved just days before Catherine's concert aired. Sophie didn't mince words. "It wasn't a coincidence," she said, pointing out a familiar pattern everyone had seen before. She listed it clearly. The Oprah interview landed before Prince Philip's funeral preparations. The Netflix trailer dropped during Earthshot. The memoir leaks surfaced just before the coronation. And now this. While the palace issued no official statement, frustration inside the walls was reportedly intense. Aides were said to be furious that Christmas, a moment of national unity, had been turned into another branding battlefield. The public noticed too, and the reaction was loud. British X lit up with trending hashtags like Stand with Catherine, Christmas Not Clout, and Enough Meghan. Viewership told the real story. Catherine's concert drew more than 8.4 million viewers across the UK and Commonwealth, while Meghan's special failed to crack Netflix's UK top 10. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Then came what many called the final straw. Just days later, Meghan's US legal team filed preliminary motions to trademark the phrase royal glow, an apparent attempt to brand future lifestyle content with a royal feel. British journalists spotted the filing on December 4th, and backlash exploded instantly. "Tone deaf doesn't even cover it," Sophie said with visible exhaustion. She summed it up bluntly. "You can't leave the family, call it toxic, and then try to bottle its magic for merch." The royal family didn't sue, didn't denounce, and didn't clap back. They simply closed the door with quiet, sovereign finality. And in the aftermath of Sophie's candid interview and the events leading into December 2025, a deeper truth became impossible to avoid. Meghan Markle was never positioned to carry the crown's future, not because of where she came from, but because of how she approached it. As the fog settled over Windsor and the final months of 2025 faded into memory, the divide was no longer just cultural, it was ideological. Sophie's closing words lingered with sharp clarity. "We are not performers. We are stewards." She added that the crown isn't worn for applause, it's carried in silence for generations you'll never meet. Broadcast via Sky, it landed as the most direct critique yet, not just of Meghan's actions, but of her mindset. Meghan, Sophie implied, saw royalty as a platform. The family saw it as responsibility. That single difference haunted every chapter of Meghan's brief royal chapter. By 2025, the consequences were fully visible. Public trust in the Sussexes continued to slide, while the institution doubled down on its core pillars: discipline, discretion, and duty. There was no retaliation, only recentering. Meanwhile, Meghan's brand struggled. Her Spotify podcast was cancelled in mid-2023. Netflix reportedly scaled back future projects in 2024. Her lifestyle venture remained stuck in early development. At the same time, Catherine, Princess of Wales, kept rising through steady, meaningful work. From the Shaping Us campaign focused on early childhood to her consistent presence in mental health and family charities, she became the moral compass of the modern monarchy. Sophie put it simply, Catherine never tried to outshine anyone. She just served. And people trusted her. The numbers backed it up. A Statista report released in December 2025 showed Catherine with a 73% favourability rating among UK respondents, with William close behind at 69%. Meghan's rating had dropped to 17%, with Harry only slightly higher at 24%. These weren't just statistics. They were symbols of public sentiment. Even Harry reportedly felt the weight of it all. Insiders claimed he was deeply hurt by the poor performance of Meghan's Christmas special, while Catherine's concert dominated headlines and airwaves. Friends told British papers that Harry quietly explored reconnecting with senior royals, but only under strict conditions set by Meghan, including no public apology and no exit from media ventures. The palace response was unanimous and coldly clear. No half return, no hybrid roles. One senior aide summed it up. There will be no second Sandringham summit. The crown, they said, had moved on. For Sophie, the conclusion was both personal and institutional. She believed Meghan had destabilised the house for profit, visibility, or validation. She treated us like an obstacle, Sophie said in the interview's final moments. Not a family, not a lineage, not a country. That distinction shaped the palace's quiet but decisive posture. Meghan and Harry would not lose their titles because in royal logic, silence often cuts deeper than punishment. They would remain Duke and Duchess in name only, with no role, no budget, and no influence. As 2025 closed, King Charles recorded his Christmas message from Sandringham, calm and resolute. Catherine stood beside him in deep emerald, William steady at her side. Not a single word was spoken about Meghan or Harry, and that silence spoke volumes. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.